So I think you got to just kind of check yourself. And if you're using this plant or consuming anything in life as a way to bring about consciousness and a way to bring about health and well-being, then in my opinion, I fully support and encourage that.
Life is all about relationships. Lovers, family, body, or money. How satisfied you are can be completely explained by how you relate to things around you. This is Sophie Jaffe, and together with my husband, Dr. D. Jaffe, we are here to explore and teach you how to maximize your relationships and achieve a happier life. Let's get ignited.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Ignited Relationships Podcast. I'm D. Jaffe, and as you know, if you've been listening to Ignited for any length of time, you know that we're no strangers to drugs. I may talk about them a lot, actually, but today we're going to talk about them in a slightly different context, and that is one not related to addiction necessarily or to problems that people can develop with them, but rather as potentially even tools that people can use every day. Now, if you listen to the Friday episode at all, you know that I'm actually of the belief that even people who struggle with addiction issues are really using these things for healing. It just, they've ended up being over-reliant on them. But today we're going to talk about cannabis specifically in the context of healing, self-discovery, and self-care. Obviously, I think you know that I'm against the war on drugs, and drugs have gotten a really bad rep since that started in the 60s. But we also know that that was actually a way to marginalize groups who were using drugs in a pretty heavy-handed way. And we're entering a new age, and there's a lot going on, a lot in terms of legalization, decriminalization, etc. We've talked about it before. There's another episode that we will link to here. Bottom line is, and we love this here at Ignited, we're all getting a lot more honest and real about what actually serves us, what doesn't, and about all the gray areas in the middle. Using cannabis has been incredibly controversial for many, many decades as part of that war on drugs. But you know, if you think about it, even the name weed or marijuana were there to delegitimize and stigmatize this substance. But we've seen legalization and decriminalization taken over time, and we've definitely gotten a little bit more comfortable with this nuance. And at Ignited, we're about nothing if not getting us more comfortable with those gray areas and getting to understand the underlying reasons why we're doing things and potentially new ways of getting our life where we want it. So today we're going to talk to Kate, otherwise known as Miss Grass. And Kate's a parent, just like Sophie and I, and she's on a mission to normalize weed through her brand, Miss Grass. And so it's going to be really interesting to talk about the journey that she's had, the specific aspects. I'm not a massive cannabis consumer myself. It typically makes me more anxious than I like. And so it's not something I rely on a lot. But again, right, a big part of what we talk about here at Ignite is what works for you and what resonates with you does not need to be what does resonate and work for me. That's kind of the beauty of us all being individuals. So check out Kate Miller. Really cool aspects of how to use doses, the specific strains, and all these elements that we've never really gotten into the nitty gritty of on this podcast because we've never had anybody like Kate on. I know for a fact that there are a lot of people that I work with who have transitioned from drinking to some cannabis because it seems to help them while greatly reducing their reliance on alcohol. And so I've definitely seen this be useful, even in that context a few times. Keep an open mind, whether you're a smoker or not. And let's get to the show. See you in a minute.
This episode of the Ignited podcast is brought to you by Philosophie Superfoods. The Philosophie offers cleanses and other nutritional products that are unlike any of the other supplements and detoxification programs on the market. Why? Because they actually nourish the body with whole, live, nutrient-rich foods instead of depriving you and leaving you hungry. Have you ever tried a cleanse only to find out that you can't make it through a whole day because you're starving? Ever try a superfood shake that made you nauseous because it was so disgusting you'd rather not eat? The Philosophie fix all that with a simple set of offerings that load up your body with nutrients while actually tasting good. Makes sense, right? Each of the Philosophie superfood and protein blends is vegan, raw, gluten-free, and has absolutely no filler ingredients. with over 15,000 satisfied customers, including some of the world's biggest celebrities like George Clooney, Gerard Butler, Lea Michele, and over 10 years of experience, this is the best stuff you can get. To buy some or find out more info, go to our website, thephilosophy.com.
Welcome, everybody. We've got Kate Miller with us here today from Miss Grass. What's up, Kate? How you doing?
Great. How are you doing?
I am doing great. We were talking right before we started recording here about the elements of cannabis you have to pay attention to if you're going to smoke some. And I got to tell you, the reason I want to jump right in is one of my first thoughts right off the bat was, I got to tell you, I'm amazed when I walk into like MedMan or any dispensary locally here in LA.
Blown away,
but partially part of my story is I used to sell drugs for a living 20 years ago. And so it's pretty amazing to see the changes in the industry from the times when, you know, if you had like a pound bag on you, you were in business versus now there's such a nuance to the way people consume cannabis. It's literally like an entirely different experience than it was 20 years ago.
Oh, 100%. There's a proliferation of different form factors and products. And we now actually have the luxury of understanding what's in the products that we're consuming. It has evolved so much. I also wasn't selling weed like drugs illegally, but I was working as a bud tender back in 2007, 2008 in the medical space in California. And what we were selling in the dispensaries back then to what it looks like today, you would think it was a completely different industry.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, back in the day, it was like, is it kind? Is it swag? Like what people cared about was
swag.
There was a lot of it, but also what people cared about was like, how many seeds are going to be in my weed versus do I just get like flour and that's it?
Oh my gosh,
remember?
Seeds.
Remember that
that's
shit?
So funny.
Like that's all it used to be, and now you walk in and you talk about form factors, but like even the profile of the actual
flower,
the cannabis that you're getting was pretty amazing. So, truly. I mean, you mentioned working in the field since 2007. Walk us through how you got here to this place. Were you always advocating for weed? What's that trip been like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things in life that now looking back, I'm like, wow, it makes so much sense that I'm now devoting my career and my life towards this plant. But I wasn't as conscious going through it that I would end up where I'm at today. I grew up in Jersey. My brother got kicked out of high school for selling weed. So you too?
Same.
Her brother.
Oh, wow.
My brother. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So that was kind of the first time that I found myself advocating for this plant. Obviously in the end goal of advocating for my brother. But I remember back then just thinking for the first time, wow, like this is fucked. I hope I can curse on this podcast.
You can say whatever you want.
Where I would go to high school parties in Jersey, and in Jersey, everyone thinks they're tough. So we drink alcohol and people get in fights. And then you would see people smoke weed. And the worst thing that happens is we're in someone's car driving through a drive-through and like getting crappy food. You know, I just remember there being such a disconnect. And then when I moved out west to attend university in Los Angeles, it was the first time that I lived in a place that had a legal market. So at the time it was medically legal in California. So I very quickly got a medical license. And I just remember that first experience inside a dispensary and being able to talk to the bud tender and actually asking about different products. And just for the first time as a consumer, had a choice of what products I wanted to buy, the intention of products. I have psoriasis. So it was the first time I was introduced to a topical, which has completely transformed my skin. And I have done everything from Humira shots twice a week to every steroid cream known to man. And it was the only thing that really, really helped me. And that was the shift for me. When I was out in Los Angeles and was introduced to the market out here, I became a conscious consumer. I was consuming this plant beyond the let's smoke and get super high. I still do that, but I also consume it with way more intention as a catalyst for creativity and inspiration as a connector to so many people in my life for my psoriasis topically. And that was the moment that I was like, wow, the potential of this plant is so massive. And I just fell in love with it. So, which is what work as a bartender while attending university my junior and senior year. That was 2007, 2008. The industry looked a lot different back then, but still it just reinforced my belief in the power of this plant to really shift people's lives just tremendously. So I bought the URL back then in 2008, missgrass.com, because there was a disconnect between all the things that I was selling as a bartender in our dispensary and the way cannabis was portrayed in pop culture and in the media, and then how myself and my friends were integrating this plant consciously into their lives. So that was somewhat the mission back then. Obviously, I sat on that URL for about a decade before I actually invested time and devoted my career to it. But the idea was to create a brand that authentically represented the modern consumer. And that's very much still integral to our mission today.
I love that. I love your branding. I love the mission. I love the give back factor, which we can talk about. But I come from a family of like my stepdad and my mom smoked my entire childhood. I'd find like joints in little ashtrays, and I kind of had to fill in the gaps because my mom didn't ever have a conversation with me. And it's really too bad that, all that shame and stigma had to build because it wasn't legal. And because, like if she were sitting around, now I understand, like I would prefer to smoke weed. I like myself better when I smoke a little weed versus having a glass of wine. Mm-hmm. But for so long, alcohol has been legal and weed hasn't. So there's that shame, there's stigma. So my mom couldn't have a conversation with me. So for years, I built up this story that like this thing was bad. You had to hide it. And it's so unfortunate. And then same as you, my brother got kicked out of school in 9th grade. Who knows the real story? But the story he tells is that a friend asked him to hold it for him. 9th grade. I mean, we're babies in 9th grade. Yeah. And he got caught because my brother always gets caught. And he got kicked out of school in 9th grade. And that was the beginning of the end for him. And it's been a really hard road because weed is legal. Yep. Not because there's anything wrong with the medicine of weed, not because there's, I think it affects everyone differently, of course. But the underlying theme that I'm hearing is just like normalizing something that is so normal in a lot of people's lives. And allowing, now it is legal. And is it every state now, Adi? No. Okay.
No, not even close.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's legal medically in about 20 states, even just medically.
Even more than that medically. But despite a lot of states having cannabis legalization in their state, whether that's recreation or medical, it still is very different than the federal government making this plant federally legal. For instance, I live in California and our surrounding states are legal, have legal cannabis programs, but I can't ship a Miss Grass product or a cannabis product from California to a consumer in Oregon, let's just say, despite Oregon being legal.
Crossing federal.
Exactly. So that will be the game changer for the industry.
Absolutely. And I mean, again, I think very few of us would have imagined we'd even be here in 15 years ago. So I think there's been some massive changes. And if we look in general at the context of kind of the war on drugs and, where they started kind of in the 60s with the Nixon era and the anti-Vietnam protests and things of that nature, so much of it was centered on cannabis. So I think cannabis is kind of like the arrow tip when it comes to ending this war on drugs. And, you and Sophie were talking about how because weed has been illegal for a while, there's a stigma and the shame around it and all those things. And again, really started around the Vietnam era. Mm-hmm. But there's something interesting that I want to explore with you a little bit. And that is, so most of my work happens around addiction. And it's certainly true that in relative terms, cannabis is it's a mild drug, even when people develop dependencies on it. But I think almost anything can have a dependency developed on it. That's not like that's not the thing I want to focus on so much. But you guys mentioned I'd rather have a drink or I'd rather smoke, and different people have preferences. There's something interesting that happens though sometimes for people around cannabis, and that is, people who smoke it throughout the day and sort of use it as a functional regulator. I don't know how else to call it. And that has partially to do with how long acting the drug is, right? It kind of sticks around for longer than a shot of whiskey or something like that. But I wonder how you feel about, look, it's a free country. You get to do whatever the hell you want. But if I had a friend who started like drinking at 11, it would make me talk to them a little bit like, hey, what's going on around this use? Like, why is it that around 11 you need to have a drink? And I find that for some of my clients, not a lot, but for some of my clients, there's this sense of, well, I stay stoned. And it does to some extent, and this could just be my stigma, but it does to some extent remind me of my college days sitting in a room with people smoking weed. And there's that stereotype that kind of kicks back in. And I feel like it gets addressed differently between weed and alcohol. And I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
I completely agree. I mean, listen, we're all indoctrinated by the war on drugs, whether we realize it or not. And you had mentioned the war on drugs, you mentioned the Nixon era, and how cannabis was kind of that, like, the drug that they really shone a light on the most as like being so harmful. And, it was devil's lettuce, and it was being portrayed in that way that like very much still impact the stigma that is attached to that plant today. Yeah. So like that is very real. And, I've been consuming this plant for a long time. And when I was first consuming it, I had no idea of that. I really didn't dive into the history or why this was illegal in the first place, which essentially is propaganda to further disenfranchise Black and brown bodies in our country. And something else I want to comment had mentioned is around, some people using this plant from morning until night, and how there is a stigma attached to that as like that being like the stoner and like the escape. And I do think that like everyone is different and every body is different in terms of like what their body needs to, reach homeostasis. It could be a workout. It could be meditation. It could be cannabinoids that are interacting with your endocannabinoid system to get you in your balance and flow. So I don't necessarily think inherently that is wrong for someone to consume this plant all day long. I do think there are a lot of people who do that as an escape, that are doing that to kind of escape being present. And I think that's where it becomes, a true, that isn't a good application. Yeah. So I think you got to just kind of check yourself. And if you're using this plant or consuming anything in life as a way to bring about consciousness and a way to bring about health and well-being, then in my opinion, I fully support and encourage that.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a good point, which is anything people are using regularly to escape their reality, and we talk about this a lot on Ignited, is a problem because it's not actually allowing you to address the elements of your life that you're unhappy with. It's keeping you stuck in areas of life that you're unhappy and yet not doing anything about it. So weed is not different. It's just, it's definitely, I've noticed it actually weirdly less stigmatized. Like I've noticed hitting a joint at 11 is much less stigmatized. Again, we live in LA, right? So right. Venice, Santa Monica, like much less stigmatized if you start doing that on a Tuesday at 11 than if you start drinking at 11. And I'm wondering, like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, for me, weed has since middle of college been a kind of drug where I don't do it socially. If I smoke socially, I get anxious and I get, that kind of panic effect that some people have. So it's not a social drug for me, but it's really interesting to see. And you mentioned people are different, and that will always be true.
Not to mention there's just so many different applications of this plan and different plant makeups and so it's really not a like one size. I mean, I guess it's like alcohol or anything else. It's not like having a tequila drink and having a glass of wine is, exactly the same. So there's definitely different form factors, different, terpene profile and cannabinoid profiles of different products that make you feel differently.
I also feel like, just like with anything, like we talked about, working out, whatever it might be, there's like, yes, it's the way that particular substance or activity affects your unique body.
Yes.
And it's also a matter of like, are you trying to escape your feelings? Are you trying to push away? You're trying to fight something that's going on in your life. You're trying to avoid something that's going on in your life. But then there's also sometimes weed allows me to feel. Sometimes it allows me to really access my feelings and emotions in a very healthy way when my sober self won't let me go there because I want to keep everything in control and I want to, keep my obligations and responsibilities at the forefront of my mind. And so I don't let myself get silly, laugh, cry, feel my husband's intimacy. It's like there's these walls that I build up, and sometimes weed is the exact medicine I need to let those walls down. Now, I don't want to be dependent on that. So it's really about knowing yourself and your body. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I'm so happy that you shared that. And thank you for sharing that because I 100% agree. I mean, to give you an example, my partner and I consume this plant together. And there are some times that my partner smokes and he feels anxious. And which is sometimes why he's like, oh, I don't like to smoke because I feel anxious.
Exactly.
Where I'm like, is it the weed that is making you feel anxious or is stuff inside of you that is the cannabis is allowing you to have a magnifying glass on what's going on inside. And at least for me, like it has been so therapeutic for me to consume this plant and work out shit that I've been like holding onto and storing inside my body that like isn't always comfortable to work out. Like I'm not saying like I smoke and it's like the most enjoyable experience to work that out, but it is very therapeutic for me.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree 100%. And there's also things sometimes that I'll discover about my body. Like for a while, I would have this weird back pain the minute the weed would hit me. And I'm like, what is that? I'm like, oh, it's just something that I've been ignoring when I'm sober. And I just keep pretending that I'm not having that back pain so that I can get on with my life because I don't want to focus on that pain. And then the weed allows me, it's a reflection and, and mirroring what's going on internally. And that's really beautiful. I actually had like the most amazing experience. What was that, 2 nights ago? And just all the things that I was just describing, it's like, I had this really intense block just because I've been like protecting myself and my energy. I'm kind of like at my wit's end in all ways and really thoroughly depleted. And so I don't have space in my mind to like make love to a D or be kind to him because I'm like, he should just be holding me right now. And so I have this idea of like, here's the things he should be doing to take care of me if he really loves me. And then it makes me more turned off by putting up more walls and more walls and more walls. And the other night we smoked and I let all those walls down. I had like 2 really deep cries that were so therapeutic, like sobbing my eyes out, like that, like ugly crying. And, just like all the emotions. And I let myself feel all of it. And it was actually the best release. And I've been in such a better mood ever since. And I think with any drug, with any substance, anything that we can do, for me personally, it's like, it doesn't matter what it is. If you figure out what works for you, that's the thing that you should be doing until it doesn't work anymore. And yes, continuing to check in with yourself and ask like, is this in alignment for my greatest self right now? Or am I maybe getting stuck in patterns of like, just what I do on a Thursday night. Like, I don't ever want to get to that place. And Adi and I are constantly like checking in with ourselves. Are we having a drink just because that's like the thing we do? And, or are we doing it because we want to connect or let go or whatever?
Yep. Completely agree.
Can I ask you a question, Kate? So you mentioned with your partner, how do you can you talk more about how this gets incorporated into your relationship? Do you have ways in which you consume it together differently than when you consume it alone? Do you go for specific strands or specific types to feel certain ways? Expert, let's talk about the specifics here.
Yeah, so it's definitely not a one size fits all. So it's not like if I'm consuming with my partner, I'm only consuming product X. It's very much dependent on what we're looking for at the time. So I definitely have a stronger and more intimate relationship with cannabis than my partner. So a lot of times I'm kind of like guiding what we're consuming, and I tend to have the products. So joints is our typical go-to. We smoke a lot of joints together, and that could be a number of different ways, from at the end of a really long, stressful work day at night. I have a little rooftop in my apartment building, and we'll go up and share a joint together. And it's our kind of decompression moment of just releasing the day. I tend to be very, depending on what I'm consuming, but a lot of times I get in my head, and it allows me to be reflective of the day and, what I would have showed up differently or done things differently, but then allows me to release it at the same time. So extract the learnings, but then not hold on to them, and release my day to enter the next. We consume cannabis a lot in the bedroom. So I'm a big fan of cannabis lube. So that is something that we do together there. And then we'll sometimes consume an edible. I tend to like smoking more than consuming an edible, but depending on the type of high, there'll be evenings where we'll take a 2.5 to a 5 milligram edible.
Yeah, so the edible conversation is such a new conversation. I want to talk about, we've used CBD lube and stuff like that before, and we've talked about that here. I'd love to talk a little bit more about actual THC content in that, and then we can also talk about cannabinoids. This is such a cliche, but the whole edible concept before, I feel the last 10 years really was that whole either weed brownies or that kind of stuff, or people who were really hardcore, like I was in high school in the beginning of college, who would consume weed. And I feel edible is one of those weird places where things can go very well and get this nice, smooth high that lasts a while, or everybody has the quintessential story where you overdid it and you just freaking lose it. And I feel everybody's got one of those edible stories.
100%. Absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting. I think that's exactly why there is a lot of hesitation to approach edibles again for a lot of people, because to your point, everyone has that story where they ate a brownie that was probably dosed at 100 milligrams back then. And
literally
we were I'm dying right now. This is the end of me.
Of everything forever.
Everything.
So scary. It's so scary.
Yeah, it is. But honestly, I actually encourage people who are integrating this plant again in their lives, or who are new to consuming cannabis. I always recommend them starting out with an edible, because today, and it very much depends on where you live. We're very lucky to live in California and be able to walk on any single street into a legal dispensary and have the options that we do in terms of the edible options and options for all different form factors. But an edible in a legal market is really down to a science of exactly how many milligrams of THC in there, how many milligrams of CBD, what I can integrate it into it in terms of the terpene profile and the cannabinoid profile, where flower, for instance, which is, the plant, if you're consuming it in a joint or in a pipe or in a bong, flower is a plant, and you can't and now with indoor grow and the technology of cultivation that has evolved a lot, it definitely it's better and better, but there's not, it's not down to a science of if I'm consuming this Blue Dream from this brand, this production run, and I'm consuming it the next production run, it's not going to be exactly the same. Where an edible can really get down to consistent across the board. And there are now edibles that are really, really low dose. I always recommend people who are new to this, like, start out with a balanced edible, like a 1-to-1 THC to CBD. And I would start low and go slow. So start with like a 2 milligram THC to CBD. And CBD is actually an antidote to THC. So it really does help to balance out the high.
So great. Yeah. I've only started exploring in the last, probably really since quarantine. So maybe like 9 months, edibles have been my go-to. And I think, again, it's the availability. It's that it's legal. I get a lot of it sent to me. I really like being able to depend on the high that I am going to have. So I'm like, my happy place is like 2.8 milligrams. Like I always joke, like I have to like take like a 5 milligram gummy and then I cut it in half. I have that. And then I have a little tiny nibble of the other half. And like, and that is my happy place. And I can depend on it. I know what I'm going to feel like. I'm such a better mom. I'm so playful. I'm cracking up with the kids. And like, I've always had experiences like that. Even like the one-offs when we had a friend that was living with us a few years ago and she came from Colorado and it was legal there. And I had a headache one day and she's like, oh, just take some of these. And she gave me a bunch and I was high for like 12 hours. But during that time, I had my kids came home from school and I had the most fun afternoon with them probably to date. And it's because I was high and I just was a playful child again. And I do need to remind myself, like, it's okay to have these things, like take away the stigma. Why wouldn't you want to be a better, more playful, less stressed out human around your children? Like, or just even in general, right? Like, and just taking that away and like, whatever we can all do to peel away the layers of stress and tension and anxieties to show up better for ourselves is more of that, please.
Please, 100%. Support that. And I think it takes stories like you sharing that on the platform that you have to share that. So other mothers who are listening knows that, like, I don't want to have to be in the closet around my cannabis use. Like, it's okay. And if anything, if it's making you show up better, you're more present, you're more like jovial and fun. And like, if anything, power to you. Like, we should be encouraging people to consume this plant.
Well, you think about it, like 50s, 60s, 70s, women were giving essentially speed, right? Benzodrine to be able to accomplish their tasks during the day. And then when their husband came home and the kids were coming back from school, they got benzos and tranquilizers to make them calm and collected. And, you know, the husband would have a couple of drinks. I think it's going to be a really interesting play as we kind of hopefully gradually devolve this war on drugs to a more responsible approach for people to have individual freedoms and responsibilities, right? Like, I can't get high with the kids. Like, it's not that I can't. I absolutely can. If I get to that place that Sophie was talking about where she's really high, like, I need to isolate. I want to isolate. I don't want to be around other people. So it's like, you have to really know yourself. And and also not just know yourself, but also moderate and be accountable. I think what Sophie and I do well is, if I'm in a period in my life where I'm drinking more than usual, Sophie will call me on and be like, hey, you're drinking a bunch. What's going on? Or if I would get to a point where I'm depending on something else, I hope she would do the same thing. And
we did actually last week, our friend came to stay with us and she smokes a lot of weed. Like she's an artist. She lives alone with her boyfriend. There's no kids. Like, she's an artist. Like, why not get high all day? So she smokes from like the minute she wakes up all the way till night. So she was here staying with us. So in the evenings, the 3 nights she was here, I smoked with her every night because why not? And, when she left, it was the 4th night and Adie's like, and I was like, should I smoke? And he's like, didn't you just smoke the last 3 nights? And that's, and it's just a check-in. He's not at all being like, you can't do this. He's just saying, hey, let's look into this. And the same thing when I ask him about alcohol, like, haven't you had a drink the last 3 nights, or didn't you have several drinks last? And then we can talk about it with respect and openness and mutually wanting the best for the other and our partner. And like 100%, if I needed to get high in that moment, I would have said yes. But instead I was like, yeah, good idea. I guess it does kind of make me groggy when I wake up, and when I smoke too many nights in a row, then it makes me groggy after a while. So I actually do prefer to do it like spread out 1 to 2 times during the week. And that's knowing my body, and that's having respect for each other's best selves and best parenting and all of that.
It's so important to check in with yourself. I mean, not even about what drugs we're consuming, about everything, like waking up. Even I was on a flight yesterday. So I woke up and I was like, oh, my body, checking in with myself. I need to flow today. I need to do some type of like movement in my body. And you need those regular check-ins to ask yourself, like, how am I feeling? Like, what do I need? And it also, going to another point that you said, it takes time to get good at weed. Like I say that like jokingly, but it's so true. You really need to figure out what is right for you. Like, you've gotten it down to it sounds like a point, like decimal point of a milligram of THC that is like your perfect edible dosage. But like, it's not like you woke up one day, you tried edibles for the first time and you landed on that right away.
Absolutely.
Like, it does take time. And there's so many new products now in this industry that, like, even if you have been consuming this plant for a really long time, there's newness that it's worth diving into and educating yourself so that you're equipped with the resources you need to be a conscious consumer in this space. Just like we're conscious consumers when we're at the grocery store and buying our vegetables, and when we're in the Sephora aisle and looking for clean beauty products to put on our face. It's no different. So that goes back to like truly our mission at Miss Grass is to help the world get good at weed so that they can be conscious consumers. They can vote with their dollar. They can create a more equitable industry. They can get smarter around how, like, what's the proper dosage and form factor? What should I look for when I'm shopping for weed that fits my intention and my need of consuming this plant?
That's awesome. Well, that could be a great segue to telling us a little bit about what are some products you're really proud of, or some things that you've been able to create doing this professionally that you want us to know about.
Well, there's a ton of my favorites. I'll just rattle off a couple. So at Miss Grass, we have our own brand, our own product brand, which of course I'm extremely proud of. We've worked long and hard to develop what we feel is the perfect form factor and the perfect what it's addressing, the effect of our product. So we have Miss Grass Minis, which are mini pre-rolled joints. They come in packs of 5 and a matchbox. And those are available in the California legal market. So you can buy those in dispensaries in California. And then we have a hemp version, which uses hemp and other adaptogenic herbs to elicit what we know our community's 3 biggest need states are. They're looking for things to consume for sexual wellness, for balance, and for sleep. So we formulated with adaptogenic herbs and CBD and CBG hemp pre-rolls on the hemp side, which are available nationwide. So you can get those on our site. Some other products that I really love, some of these we sell on our e-com marketplace on missgrass.com, others we don't. But there's a brand called Frig. It is owned by this woman, Kimberly Dillon, who is just, she's incredible. She is so knowledgeable about this plant. She was the CMO of Papa and Barkley, which is a legacy cannabis brand.
Oh, yeah.
And she started her own company called Frig. It's Frigg. And my favorite product that she makes, specifically because I struggle with psoriasis, she has I think she calls it like a hair potion, and it's a dropper. It's a tincture form that I put on my scalp because that's where I have psoriasis the most, and I sleep with it on, and I rinse it out in the morning, and it is wonderful. It is really, really incredible. Another topical brand that I really love is Apothecana. They are also have been in this space for really, really a long time. James and Joy are the two founders of it. And they just, everything they touch is just so thoughtful, and their ingredients are the cleanest. I love them. And I use their everyday lotion all over my body, honestly, after I get out of the shower. So those are just a couple that I love. I love going back to CBD lube conversation. Foria is my favorite sexual wellness cannabis brand. They make a CBD and they make a THC version of their lube. You can buy the CBD version online nationwide, and then the THC is available in the California and the Colorado markets, but it's incredible.
Yeah, I think we have a dropper in both nightstands, literally, so like we don't have to reach.
We have it in our guest. We even have it in our guest room, and all of my guests have been like, "That is so cool that you have that on your nightstand." And I was like, "Yep, it's staying there."
It's beautiful too now, cannabis products, to a point where you almost want to show them off. They're so pretty.
It's stunning.
Yeah.
It's a statement, right?
Truly.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Well, that's really, really cool. Thank you so much for hopping on here and just, talking about this and giving some real thoughtful conversation about it. They're, both from the relaxation sort of lifestyle elements to this, but then also the sexual components, as you just mentioned. I mean, that's definitely become, since we got introduced to Foria, a pretty regular part of our sex life over the last, 2 years.
Yeah.
So
I love it. Well, thank you guys so much for having me on and just having this space to have these types of conversations. It's really important. So thank you.
Of course. Absolutely. We have 5 questions that we ask all of our guests. The first one, and obviously just first thing that comes to mind, it can relate to the cannabis industry or just your life. What is the best advice that you've ever received?
Ooh, well, the first thing that comes to mind is a saying that someone once told me a while back: fake it till you make it. Not to encourage people to go through life bullshitting, but I think in the entrepreneurial world, there's so much that I do not know, and I'm learning And there's something about having the confidence and knowing that it's going to work out, and just approaching business conversations, approaching fundraising conversations, you name it, with that like aura of confidence about you.
Absolutely.
Really
we
important.
love that. We love that.
What's been one of your proudest moments to date?
2 things come to mind. One, our team, being able to employ and have a team of, we're actually 9 all women right now, incredible women who have their own unique relationship to this plant. And it's been a proud moment just to see everyone grow within the organization and really shine in their respective roles. And another proud moment, and this kind of happens frequently, but it's nonetheless, I love receiving letters or comments on our Instagram or DMs just from our community, just sharing their own personal stories of how this plant has completely transformed their lives. It puts things in perspective of what we're doing is beyond the like, let's create a successful business. And it's just much more meaningful than that.
Awesome.
We both love that and echo that.
Yeah.
What about one of your hardest moments?
God, I feel like every other day.
Right.
Hardest moments. Fundraising was challenging because it was a new, I've never fundraised before. So that was challenging. And I would say, despite the working remotely this year and it going really well and we're doing well, but I think creating culture is really important to us at the company, and to still create that culture in a now remote world. It has been difficult to evolve that in the same way that like being in an office together every day.
I'm sure
created that.
Probably especially for products, because normally it's such a visceral, like sitting there touching stuff, etc.
Really, yeah.
you mentioned some self-care rituals specifically around THC, around psoriasis and things like that. Being an entrepreneur, especially in this age of COVID, as you mentioned, is taxing. What are some self-care rituals, some ways you take care of yourself to make sure you can make it and create the change you want in the world?
Moving my body is so important. And it's something that I speak to try to manifest more of, because I find myself if I am running late to something, it's like the first thing that goes, and I just need to prioritize that much more. But if I move my body once a day, it completely transforms my life. So yoga, stretching, anything like that. And then weed, honestly, thank God for weed. Mm-hmm. It's really like my number one self-care tool.
It's awesome.
And then last but not least, our podcast is called Ignited. What ignites you?
The opportunity to create a really impactful brand that inspires so many people to be conscious consumers in cannabis and explore this plant, which I truly believe can change people's lives.
Mm.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, you're doing it, and you're, as Sophie mentioned, like the branding, the work you're doing is so on point. And I love seeing people who are doing this consciously, and it's not just about, hey,
let's get high,
get messed up, everything,
Yeah, that consciousness and really having intention is really that's just where we're at right now in our lives. And I think the more conscious and the more intentional we can all be with ourselves, the more our entire world will pivot and start to be more intentional as a world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody listening, don't forget, subscribe, tag both of us, all of us. Let us know what resonated with you. Tell us your weed story. Tell us your cannabis plant story, and let us know how this has made a difference in your life. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Ignited podcast. We were so happy to have you along for this ride. Please go and subscribe to this. Leave us a review. We love hearing from you. And if you want more, don't forget to go to ignited.com, where all the podcast episodes are available with show notes and so many of the little details and links from each one of these interviews. And you can look at all the future events that we have going on, all the things that make Ignited so special, even beyond this recording. Again, thank you so much for joining us. We will see you next week.